Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone. And welcome back to this week's episode of Spotlight on FASD. Thank you for joining us. We have another lovely guest this week, so it's really exciting to be able to talk to people. We're still on our sensory journey, so talking about all things sensory. So today we're talking to Emily, and Emily is from, she's a fellow podcaster. She has a podcast called 21 Sensory Podcast. Emily has a sensory processing disorder, is autistic, and also has an adopted brother with FASD. So she knows everything, all things sensory because of her own needs, but also her living with her brother. So thank you for joining us. We're very, very excited that you've reached out and would love to talk to you. So we just want to hear a little bit about your experiences. I think probably my first question would be, at what point, we've very briefly talked before about how the journey of sensory needs versus diagnosis is kind of either one way or the other for people, and people either know that they've got need real sensory input and they've got different sensory processing needs before they have a diagnosis, and that comes first, or people don't realise that they have these sensory differences until they get a diagnosis. So which way around was it for you?
Hi. Yeah, exactly what you said. So for me, I think I noticed my sensory processing difficulties before I was diagnosed. Luckily enough, actually my parents realised through my brother, who you mentioned has FASD and is adopted. They noticed he had a lot of sensory stuff going on, and as they were kind of bringing him up, they also realised I was displaying a lot of the same sort of sensory needs as him, and that's kind of what brought them to take me to a occupational therapist, and she was the one who diagnosed me with sensory processing difficulties. So I think I was about aged 8 in primary school. So for me, yeah, the sensory stuff definitely came first, and the autism came way later in my adult life. But just speaking to people online in the kind of autism community and just kind of people who are neurodiverse in general, it can be really much the kind of the other way round. They'll realise that, oh, actually I've had these sensory needs all my life, but it's only since I've got the diagnosis of, say, autism or Tourette's or something like that they've come to that realisation. Yeah.
Because I'd said to you earlier that I didn't realise that the way that I was parenting my children before we had any kind of a diagnosis, I just knew that that's how they needed life delivered to them, and it was just, I had evolved to meet all of those needs. Like, we didn't drive a certain way to school, you couldn't, definitely not that colour for that one, not that kind of fabric, definitely don't let them smell that food. And it was just how things were, and I just evolved to accommodate all of that. And it wasn't until I took a step back and had an OT in my life, which I can't stop talking about the importance of occupational therapists and their role that they play in FASD and autism. It wasn't until then that I was, they were like, no, yeah, you're doing a really good job, but you are actually, you are putting all of these accommodations in. And I was delivering a pretty intensive sensory diet to 3 children, and I didn't know I was doing it. But when I did know I was doing it, and this is the importance, I think, of having that input from a professional, when I was doing it intentionally, because I was doing it unintentionally up until then, it was just to survive without, very upset children. When I was doing it intentionally, it became even easier and more powerful. It had more of an impact doing it intentionally. And I think it's really interesting what you've just said, because a lot of our FASD children are diagnosed with autism, and sometimes they never then get the FASD diagnosis, which is the umbrella diagnosis above it all, because a lot of the symptoms are very, very similar, identical in a lot of cases. So I think it must have been so interesting for your parents to watch the two of you growing up alongside each other. There must have been so many similarities between your needs and your brother's needs. I think that's really fascinating to me, and just shows that your parents. Did your parents know that your brother had FASD?
No, he was only diagnosed when he was 19.
Right.
So,
okay. So
yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of So Claire puts it as as having these needs alongside each other, but I guess what your parents were actually doing in that situation is thinking like, okay, the similarities, there's things like, what are we juggling here really, if they just didn't know. So was your brother also diagnosed with sensory processing disorder?
He I think he initially my parents, we adopted him. I should start from the start really. We adopted him age 2, and we didn't know that he had any sort of special needs or difficulties. And it was only as he was growing up and through primary school that my parents realised that he had a sort of speech delay and processing difficulties. And they thought that he might be autistic, but he never had that sort of diagnosis, if that makes sense. So they knew from going, being referred to a hospital, that he had some neurological condition, but they couldn't sort of pinpoint what that was. And it was only recently that he was diagnosed. He's now 20. But it was only going back into his past and his history and being able to look back at paperwork and stuff like that. So it was really a sort of detective sort of journey to try and find that out for him.
What made them, what do you think made them, when did FASD come on the radar as even a possibility?
I think to some extent it was slightly on their radar because they knew of his birth mum's difficulties with alcohol, but they didn't know the extent to it and didn't have access to that sort of paperwork. It was only when they really pushed social services to go back into his history that they were able to get that. And then obviously it was a long wait for a referral because it takes a lot of time to be seen. So definitely. He had some mental health issues in his late teens, and that's what prompted us to look for a sort of diagnosis, if that makes sense.
So that must be a really, really interesting time of your parents navigating all these things as the two of you were growing up. And really interesting. I mean, was your house like Claire's? Was your house full of these sensory diet accommodations, or?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think I'm very sensory defensive, and my brother is very sensory seeking, so that we don't always get along in terms of sensory stuff. And he's very much seeking out lots of opportunities and stuff, whereas I'm very much introverted and don't can be very picky and stuff. So it can be difficult, but it's definitely something we've got used to.
And did that impact your? Oh, sorry, Claire.
See, that just sounds like a description of my daughter and my middle boy. It's like it's like a Wreck-It Ralph, and she's trying to hide from all this noise. So it's interesting.
And how Emily, how did that impact your relationship as siblings? If did it impact your relationship as siblings, or did you live parallel to one another and accommodating your own needs as separately as you can? If you're saying that you're trying to be quite avoidant of these things, the last thing you want is somebody who's very sensory seeking. And I can see Claire laughing because she lives this every day.
It was a bit difficult, and I'm sort of more verbal than he is, so I don't think he's always able to put into words how he's feeling, or if something, say, sensory wise is upsetting him, whereas I'm able to communicate how I'm feeling most of the time. So it was a sort of struggle, I think, but I don't know, I think we understand each other better and
Yeah.
we know what would kind of annoy the other one in terms of like sensory stuff, so we know not to like touch each other or like make each other jump or like stuff like that. So I think we both have that understanding, which is quite nice. We're quite, yeah.
Emily, did you, you are quite verbal, so you know what's going to trigger you, you can explain when you've been triggered. Did you find growing up that you were kind of his translator? Like, would you be able to tell what would trigger him? Or because I know that because my daughter is so good at knowing what her triggers are, what her sensory needs are, and explaining exactly how they make her feel. I find that she is my translator for my boys, and sometimes she will explain a situation to me that's either about to unfold if I don't do something with something, whatever it might be, or can explain why something has happened. And I was just wondering if, because the similarities seem to be, quite interesting. I was just wondering if, because you were able to verbalize your needs, could you do that for him?
Definitely. I think kind of, going into different situations or like busy environments, like I had that kind of, I don't know, sense that, I'm struggling in this environment, so I can only imagine what my brother's feeling, kind of thing. And I can always kind of say, I don't know, I feel like I know what to say to him in terms of, should we step outside kind of thing, or do you want to like escape to a toilet or something? Like I can kind of almost guess. And I think he started to understand that more as he's been a teenager, but when he was young he didn't know why he was feeling the way he was. So yeah, I definitely feel like I could kind of guide him in that way.
I know that even when my little girl was very small and we didn't have a diagnosis, didn't really know what I was dealing with, and I remember one day something was happening and she said, "Mum, this is going to make him this is making him too fizzy and too muddly, and it's going to come out of his body as naughty in a minute." So she was watching what he was having to process, and she was trying to warn me that his body's going to process it in his way and it's going to come out as naughty. That was how she described it. So she I know she has been my lifeline for so long. She just instinctively does it, and I've found as they've got older, they're in like early teens now, mid-teens, and the boys, as they've got a little bit older, I see that he does navigate towards her a little bit in times of escalation, or when he's certainly at an escalation where he is still in control of it, but things are high, and she might say to me, and sometimes it's the last thing she wants to do because it's a real sensory struggle for her, but she is so full of empathy and compassion. Sometimes to our detriment, honestly. It's our biggest strength and it's our biggest curse, I feel, our empathy. It cripples her. And so sometimes, she'll say, "Mum, I'm just going to do this with him because I can tell, it's all too fizzy inside and he needs us to, and she'll be like, forcing herself through this experience of, I don't know, watching him do this, but it's very noisy, or, and she's doing that because she knows what he needs. And I just think it's a unique situation that you've clearly got with your brother, and it is it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have, because I know that it's something that gives me deep pleasure and a massive amount of support. That must have been a real support to your parents, the fact that they had, and I'm not even going to be naive enough to think that that there wasn't explosions and difficulties along the way, but it must have been a real help that you had that level of understanding of him, certainly even at a time when he didn't have that level of understanding.
Yeah, I think so. And really I should be thankful for him, because he really highlighted to my parents kind of sensory stuff, and they realized that about me. So really I should be thankful that he put me on that kind of journey to understanding that. And like you say about occupational therapy, I can't recommend it enough. It's just the most helpful form of therapy ever.
It's so practical, isn't it? I remember when I first learned the phrase sensory diet, and I genuinely thought that was like food, like physically a diet. I didn't realize it might be lying with your head dangling off the sofa for the minutes, or why does he always need to do that? Why does he always need to bang that super brush? And like, why am I going through so many? Because I just come into the kitchen and there's the broom over there, like, and then the handle is snapped off, like, and you don't realize the things that they are doing because they need to do it. And when it's explained to you by an OT, well, when they do this happens, you're like, you want to go out of your way to make it happen, because you then see the difference, like the release when it doesn't happen. And I think we are going on and on through our little sensory series about OTs, but it is just it's the point in your journey where your path completely turns. If you get on board with that, it's so important.
Yeah, and I find this really interesting with the all the similarities there being sensory. Like, sensory is at the center of that relationship between Emily, yourself, and your brother, and the way that you navigate your relationship and your world growing up in the same household, and the similarities between Claire's two children who are in a very, very similar position. And it's interesting that, yes, like Emily, your brother has this FASD diagnosis, but you don't, and Claire's children have this FASD diagnosis. And it's, I think it just shows that sensory processing disorders or difficulties or issues, however we want to describe them, are such a central part of neurodiversity and how people are interacting with each other and the world around them as well. So, this is just an even bigger shout out for OT, isn't it? I mean, blimey, we need them everywhere.
And I just can't, the more that I'm listening to your story, Emily, I just, it completely kind of totally, can't think of the word, but there's so much overlap between autism and FASD, and some people talk about a misdiagnosis, but other people would argue because the two, you can have them both together, but quite often someone has an autism diagnosis, but the FASD is never investigated or completely ignored. And this is proof. Your story is proof. The journey that your parents have gone through with you and your brother before your diagnosis, it is absolute proof how those two are run so closely together. Because I can imagine a lot of the time that we're on the sensory processing scale, you've either got your hyper or your hyposensitive. So that's always going to be different for each individual. But your journey, I can imagine at some points, was pretty identical to your brother's in terms of needs, and it's two totally different. Because what we talk about, so autism is a neurodiversity, and FASD is a brain injury. So there are so many similarities, but the source, the root of them are two very, very different circumstances. So I think that, and you are neurodiverse, but you are not neurotypical when you have FASD, but it's the result of a brain injury, not neurodiversity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating that the parallel, that the symptoms and the needs can be nearly identical. And more than once I found myself, especially when the children were smaller, I found myself in a situation where I've maybe been in public, needed a little bit of assistance, or needed to explain why something was happening. And the fastest and easiest thing for me to do to get help or to get some kind of support is just to explain that my child is autistic, because that gets instant, and I'm not criticising the person I was dealing with. It was actually a manager in Pizza Hut in Edinburgh, but I knew that I had probably 4 or 5 minutes before one of my children was going to bolt, and he was just overstimulated and he was too hungry, and I just said, my son's autistic and I really need some help. And there was just he just kicked into action. There was no hesitation. and just said the next pizza to come out of the oven is it's for this table, and then, you know, like, does he want some ice cream first? Just do what you need. We hadn't ordered anything yet, but he was just like, do what you need. We're going to get some food on your table within 2 minutes. And had I said, my son's got FASD, I would have put him in an awful position, chances are, because he wouldn't have known what that meant. He wouldn't have had any kind of indication of what kind of immediate support that I was looking for.
That's what I'm like so grateful about, because I have the exact same thing. You know, if I said to someone, oh, I have sensory processing difficulties, they'd have no idea what I meant. And that's why I'm so thankful for the diagnosis of being autistic, because I can just say I'm autistic. It's one word, people get it. But I mean, I had to wait until I was 25 to know that, but at least now I can quickly say I'm autistic if I'm freaking out or something. I'm not having to say, oh, I've got sensory stuff.
Yeah, and it's some kind of, and then it's just and even if people don't know, even if people aren't touched by autism in their lives, it's safe to say that pretty much everyone has a basic understanding of it, certainly a social acceptance of it, and a little bit of an idea of what you might need, that you need some help. But Emily, do you find that, so would you say that the sensory needs are one of your biggest aspects of your autism diagnosis?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what I struggle with most, like day to day. Also kind of, I'd say sensory and like social stuff are my two biggest things, but I would say sensory a little bit more. I do really struggle with being like overwhelmed, just because I cannot, it's like a traffic jam in my head. I can't filter my senses in any way, and it's all coming in at once, and it's almost like I always kind of describe it as like a music desk, like all the faders are all up at once, and I can't like process all this like input that's coming in. So
that's a really good way to describe it, because
isn't it?
You instantly, like I like when you can just instantly imagine what that would feel like. Because I know my children have highlighted to me inadvertently my sensory needs. You know, I know the things that trigger me now, and so actually through them I'm grateful to that, because through them I know I make I've got no one to make accommodations for me, but I make accommodations for myself. So I know that even if I bang a door quite loudly, you know, if anyone were to watch me, they would think, what on earth are you doing? Anyone watches me close the door. Because I'm like, oh, the handle goes down as slowly as it can, and I do it really, really slowly, because I've learned that, and it's because of, you know, going through difficult times with the kids when there were lots of things kicking off, any kind of a door bang for me. And then I'm maybe not the best mom that I can be when that's happened and I'm heightened. So, you know, I have noticed that I put lots of accommodations in place for myself now, and so I'm grateful for that, because I don't think any human doesn't have sensory processing needs, do there? Everyone has something.
Definitely. But I like you say, it like just being aware of something like a door bang being like triggering or upsetting. Like I would be so thankful, just like, okay, you say that you're not the best mum, but just the fact that you're considering those little things is huge in terms of being able to, like, you know, live side by side.
Like, because and I've learned it because, you know, so I like, and they do always comment about how other people, like if their dad is at my house taking care of them, you know, it'll be like, will you ask Dad to stop coming into my room? Now I know it's got nothing to do with anything other than the way he closes the door when he leaves the room. That's what it is, and that can be like misconstrued in so many different ways, but actually it's just because it's not a trigger for him, he'll leave the room, you know, wouldn't dream of leaving the door open because that would antagonize them, and he'll just pull the door shut. Everyone's up in the air then, you know. So I think that I've learned, well, I always say, I sometimes feel like 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 an Apache Indian tracker, like a native Indian, where they've got all these tracking skills where they can like listen and like I've got that level of awareness now, living with the three of them, that I can like can feel something about to know any kind of a noise. Like I would choose when I hoovered, like to say that's an excuse, like, oh yeah, I don't really go overboard with hoovering because of my children's sensory needs. It's got nothing really to do with it. But there would be times when I think if I had an opportunity to hoover and I would think, no, this is not the right time. I can't have a hoover in this house now. Things like that. And I've learned that by doing it wrong for so long. Well, I need to hoover, you'll just have to get on with it. And then I wonder why the rest of my day is just unbearable and, pardon my language, but just turns to utter rat shit. And that is a term that I use as a technical term in my home when things have fallen apart beyond anything. And I can usually trace it all back to something I've done or to some accommodation that I haven't made. I
think that's really interesting when you say as well, like, everybody's got some sort of sensory needs and everybody can put themselves in that position. Whether you are neurodiverse in some way or have anything at all, sensory processing disorder, or whether you just have an awareness of these sensory needs. And I find it really, really difficult. Like my boyfriend comes home, he'll start cooking the dinner, the extractor fan's on, the radio's blaring music, and then tries to talk to me, and I'm like, I can't have a conversation right now. There's so much noise coming in. And that's made me very, like, learning about FASD has made me very aware of my own sensory needs around just having a conversation. Like, there's so many other noises in the kitchen at that time that I just have to shut down and say, sorry, I can't hear you.
And do you think that what's quite interesting though, do you think in this, so you can put it in the context of a relationship, before you were aware of that, chances are you either wouldn't have been receptive or you would have been a bit irritated, and that could trigger
get irritated.
Yeah, what's wrong? What are you being like that for? Why? What are you being funny? And that could start an argument. And so in the same way that can trigger an incident in a relationship, if you aren't aware of the sensory needs of your family, you will trigger incidents. And I'm not an expert, but I have a greater expertise than I did. I still make mistakes, but quite often that's when I'm overwhelmed or too tired, or just I haven't got the energy to go that extra mile. And I think the comforting thing for me, and this is what I want to press home about the importance of meeting sensory needs above all else, you can turn everything around. You can turn every situation around, and the symptoms that you're dealing with, you can, because don't want to call them behaviours at all, because they are symptoms. You can ease the negative symptoms drastically when you put sensory accommodations in place. Definitely.
Yeah, and I'm really keen to hear, Emily, like what accommodations do you now have, like as an adult? Do you live on your own now?
I still live at home.
Okay.
I want to move out, but I think it's going to be a little bit difficult just because I have these sensory needs and I'm really bad with change. So small changes. So even like, my detergent changing. So the work.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge deal. And
yes,
like,
it is.
It's so difficult to explain, but yeah, I obviously would like to move out at some point, but
so do you have a whole host of accommodations that you have in place just to go about your adult life, really? I'm guessing certainly your family will, but how do you accommodate that when you go out and when you're out and about and interacting with the world? What does that look like?
I think there's a lot of different kind of techniques I've picked up along the way. I think I'm very good at masking and kind of camouflaging my sort of autistic overwhelm. So sometimes when I get back home, I can be quite kind of burnt out, just because I've been kind of keeping up this sort of act of I'm okay, I'm fine. But in terms of kind of accommodations, I think like even just like lockdown has taught me that I do much better working from home. I would usually work in an open plan office, which is just awful. Just the sights and sounds and smells, and even like people coming in with their fluorescent yellow jackets, like who've biked in, hanging that up near me, like even something as small as that is just too much for me to handle. Whereas me working at home, I've been able to like control my environment. It's all about having like routine, structure, control for me, just so that I'm in a kind of safe space. I can do what I want. I don't have to keep up this act. I'm very much, I don't know, I kind of slip into masking without realizing, and when I get home I've realized that I've just like kept this up the whole time, and I'm like absolutely like knackered from it. But I think that's something I've learned, that I didn't even realize I was doing it until I was diagnosed as autistic. I was like, so not everyone is having to put this front on all the time, or having a monologue in their head of, scripted stuff to say. Like, I didn't realize that wasn't everyone. So I think it's just all these little things I didn't realize that I was doing, that I don't know, I'm trying to accommodate and just exist in a very neurotypical world.
Yeah.
So Emily, when you were out and about or doing your job, and you now know that you were masking and camouflaging it all, and you would come home and then you would be absolutely burnt out, what would that look like for you? Would you have to go to sleep? Did it interfere with your sleep pattern?
I think so. I think usually when I come in, I would get very upset and sort of cry in front of my parents, as a kind of, I've bottled it all up and I need to get it all out. That was something I used to do a lot when I came home from school. But yeah, it would mess with my like evening routine. It would mess with my sleep, kind of like cycling over the same thoughts and the same things I've said. And it kind of disrupts like the normality, because all I want is, I'd love to have the same routine every day, eat the same things every day, see the same people every day, but that life for some unknown reason can't be like that. So it's difficult, and it can take an hour or an entire evening to get over, depending on what I've done.
And I think that's just something that so few people see that. I know with my daughter, any kind of an activity, even 2 or 3 hours, if we can manage to get her into school in the morning, will result in a minimum of like a 3-hour nap on an afternoon. She has to just shut down and go to sleep. And then that interferes with sleep later on, because she's had this big sleep. And it's so difficult, isn't it, when you can present to the world what the world sees, what you have to do to survive, and then when you are able to take that mask off, it's brutal sometimes, isn't it? How exhausting it is.
And it's a constant thing. It's a constant, keeping it up. So it can be really draining, and people don't realize that I'm doing it. And my colleagues and stuff at work have no idea what I'm dealing with internally. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's so valuable that you speak out about it. And I'm definitely going to have a listen of your podcast. So apart from anything else, I'm just going to say, because I'm well aware of the things that comfort me sensory wise, I absolutely love listening to your voice. Like, I've really, it's just so hot. I love it. It's so calming and it's so soothing. So I know that as a little sensory fix for me, I'm definitely going to be listening to your podcast, just because your voice is lovely, and it's you're giving me real insight for the years ahead for my daughter as well. So I think it's equally important for people to listen to what you've got to say. Young people like you, but also for parents of young people and young adults, to be able to help accommodate and understand a little bit just how difficult it is.
And I do that as well. I mean, I have a podcast, but also I'm an illustrator. So if I'm just going to plug my Instagram quickly,
please do.
It's just 21 Sensory. But I find that visually, through kind of like infographics and illustrations, I kind of try and I don't know, get across like like just people being more aware of sensory needs and stuff. And I just try and do like little doodles and stuff just to, you know, if people might scroll across them or like come across them on Instagram, that it might be something they consider, you know, when they're next sort of out and about and stuff like that. So I try and use different like media, like, you know, audio and also like visual stuff to try and get across this message, because you know, people process stuff so differently, which is obviously, you know, can be a sensory thing. So I try and use a load of different formats as well.
Well, we'll definitely we will on the YouTube channel, we'll definitely tag your Instagram to that, so that people will be able to follow this episode and then have a little look if they want to have a look at that.
I'll definitely share it on social media as well, like from all our platforms as part of launching this episode, so that people can find you.
Cool.
I found it fascinating talking to you. I've really, it's actually been a real comfort. You've actually given me a lot of comfort. Talking the similarities between two of my children and you and your brother, and just as well, I think the importance for any professionals listening to this, the fact that, you know, when people say that FASD and autism can pretty much look identical, it is so true, and I think your family's journey is proof of that. You know, so I think it's a really, really powerful story that you have as a family, and I'm just really thankful that you've shared that with us. It's been really lovely talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for joining us. We've really enjoyed it. Was there anything that any messages that, you know, you wanted to share just as a closing, or was there anything that you feel that, you know, you wanted to get across or anything?
I think, yeah, like you say, FASD and autism can look so similar, but then again, it can be so different. And like you say, FASD is a brain injury, and I forget it so much about my brother, and I have to remind myself, you know, okay, I'm autistic and I struggle with stuff, but my brother has a brain injury, and, you know, these kind of, I don't want to say behavior, but like you say, kind of, you know, the things that he does, you know, no matter how many times you say no, or he knows he shouldn't be doing that, he won't understand that. And it's frustrating, but just, I think if you know someone with FASD, or if you're like a parent or carer, that you're doing your best. And I know that it's so frustrating, and every day can feel like kind of Groundhog Day. That's something my parents say a lot, you know, like you're starting the day again, and saying no to the same things again. But my brother is wonderful in his own way, and he has such strengths. So I think, you know, don't just write people off, is what I want to say.
I think it's really important what you've just said there on our last little thing about, because I've actually been challenged by professionals before for using brain injury, asking me, do I really think it's necessary? And one asked us, you know, do you talk like that in front of your child? And I said, often I use it as much as I can with professionals who I can tell don't understand what's going on. But actually, what you've just said there is, you know, when I've used the term brain injury, and you've said that you have to sometimes remind yourself that that's what's going on with your brother. I went through a phase of having to use that was my internal narrative all of the time to myself, to make sure I had the right level of tolerance. Because I needed to remind myself all of the time that my children had brain injuries for me to be tolerant enough to handle what was being thrown at us, because it is difficult. There's no two ways about it. And something that you've absolutely nailed one day, and then the next day they can't do it. It's so easy to become frustrated with them, and that's absolutely unfair and wrong, because. But it's human, and I do it. I'm not saying I don't do it. And that's why I use brain injury to in my own dialogue all the time, internal dialogue, to remind myself of what I am dealing with. Because it's so easy to forget, because it's a hidden disability. It's so easy to forget. But thank you so much. You've given us such a lot to think about. It's been. I'm so happy that you reached out to us.
Yeah,
Oh, thank
fantastic part of our sensory series to hear your story and have you share some insights of what life is like.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. You let me just speak on and on.
Oh, thank you, and thank you as always to everybody listening. Please tune in again next week, and as always, get in touch on social media and things. Reach out to us just as Emily did, because you never know where things can go and where these conversations can lead. We will probably get you on if there's something that you have to share with us and talk about. So thank you.
To speak to you.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks again, Emily, and thank you to everybody listening.